welcome or welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name's Emma, and if you're not new here, you may notice that we have a totally different backdrop setup than what I normally film in. Let me know if you guys would want to see me film out here more often. If you saw the title or the thumbnail, then you already know that today's video is going to be my top 24 books of 2024, plus some bonus questions and stats. Last year I did just a general reading wrap up for the entire year, but I saw Sarah Caroli do her top 24 of 2024 and I really liked that idea and wanted to do that. But I also just have some various questions that I've pulled from different book tags that I'm going to be answering as well. So basically this video is just a 2024 reading wrap up. But before we get into my top 24 list, I'm going to start out with some quick stats. I have everything here on my laptop to reference. So I did set my goal to 50, but as of the time of me filming this video, I have hit 75 books for the year of 2024. I do think I'll squeeze in a couple reads by the end of the year because I'm filming this about midway through December. And I'm also going to quickly list off all the different genres I've read this year. We have fantasy or romantasy. I'm kind of grouping those together. Sci-fi, contemporary romance, dark romance, classics, memoirs, thrillers, mystery, graphic novels, and general fiction. That's a lot of genres, and that's probably the most variety of genres I've ever read in one year, so I'm really proud of myself for that and proud of myself for branching out into genres that were maybe a little bit outside of my comfort zone. And then these next couple of stats are all according to Goodreads, so it might not be dead on accurate, but it is what my Goodreads wrap up told me. I read 34,094 pages total, which is a huge number. That's a lot. I was blown away when I saw that. And the average page length for the books I read this year was 454 pages. And now it's time to move into my top 24 books of 2024. It was actually really hard to make this list, and I do want to give a disclaimer that I'm going to give some honorable mentions beforehand that for whatever reason I just felt that I couldn't stick them into the top 24. To start those honorable mentions, we have Dinner for Vampires by Bethany Joy Lenz. If you don't know who she is, she was an actress on one of my favorite TV shows ever, One Tree Hill. She played Haley James, and this book I'm referencing is actually her memoir. And for that reason, even though in my heart it was a 5-star, I really just try not to give ratings to memoirs because that's someone's personal story. It's not a work of fiction. So I don't know, just personally something feels wrong about giving it a rating or trying to stick it somewhere in my ranking of the best books I read this year. But I did want to give that one a shout out because I highly enjoyed it, and I think even if you don't know what One Tree Hill is or aren't a fan of it, it would be a very beneficial book to read. Her story is so interesting and inspiring, and she kind of just details her life growing up and growing into fame while also struggling with being in a religious cult. My next honorable mention is going to be the entire A Court of Thorns and Roses series. Now, if you've been watching me for a while, you probably know that that is one of my all-time favorite series ever, and it's what got me back into reading. However, since it is one of my favorite series ever, reading it in 2024 was not my first time reading it. In fact, I think it was my third or fourth time reading the entire series front to back. And since I've read it so many times, that whole series is gonna be 5 stars for me, and I just didn't feel like I should include that in my top 24 books because it's not a new series to me. I already knew I loved it. On a similar note, I also reread the first book in the Harry Potter series. Obviously gave that 5 stars. Again, I'm a massive Harry Potter fan. I have been since I was 7 years old, and so for those reasons I just didn't feel like I could include it in the top 24 because I've been knowing for years that I'm obsessed with Harry Potter and that I love it, and those books will never not be 5 stars in my eyes. And then the next 2 honorable mentions are actually books that were new releases in 2024, but I have reasons for not including them in my top 24 books. The first one is Crescent City 3, House of Flame and Shadow. Now again, I just talked about ACOTAR. I'm a huge, massive Sarah J. Maas fan. I love all her books. I've read all her books, and I highly enjoyed Crescent City 3. I read it, I want to say, in under 24 hours. I was obsessed with it. I loved it. Thankfully, I was able to read it right when it came out and kind of experience the story without having a skewed opinion from what I'd seen on the internet. But after finishing it and then getting on the internet, I saw so much discourse over whether or not the book was good or not. And I've seen a lot of people actually have extreme negative reviews and thoughts on the book. So due to the fact that that is kind of a popular opinion that people did not like that book, I did not want to include it in my top 24 list just because I feel like I have a different perspective than maybe the majority. And whether you're a new Sarah J. Maas reader or you've read all her books, I just didn't want to insert my opinion here. I think everyone should just like go through her books and form their own opinions. If you want to know more of my thoughts, you can scroll back on my videos to January. I have a full spoiler Crescent City 3 reading vlog where I talk about my thoughts and opinions, and I even discuss a little bit about why I think some people have such negative viewpoints on it. But since I've already covered that and given my thoughts on this channel, I just didn't find it necessary to rehash that and do that again here. And then the other one I'm leaving off my list is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. Like I said, this was also a new release in 2024. This is the follow-up sequel book to Fourth Wing in the Empyrean series. And I absolutely loved Fourth Wing. I love everything about the world and the characters and the storytelling. And so Iron Flame is kind of similar to Crescent City in that there was a lot of discourse about whether or not it was good. A lot of people felt extremely let down by it. And I kind of have similar feelings there. To this day, I do not know what I would rate it because part of me wants to rate it a 5-star because of how much I love the world and the characters and, like I said, just kind of everything about it. But then I also had those kind of major letdowns throughout certain plot points and just tropes that were happening. So I still, to this day, almost a year later, don't have a rating for that book. I'm leaving it off the list because I cannot make up my mind about it. And now that we're done with the honorable mentions, let's move into my actual top 24 list. This, like I said, was really hard to make. I tried to break it down based on what I rated things, but obviously I've gone through some different series. So for series, instead of putting each book separately on this list, I've just combined the ratings I gave each book in a series to create an average for the series, and that's how they're placed on this list. But I'll stop yapping and let's get into it. Starting in our 3.5 to 4-star range, spot number 24 is gonna go to The Fury by Alex Michaelides, or Michaelides. I never know how to say it, and I always hear people saying it differently on the internet, but I say it as Michaelides in my head. That's probably wrong. I am actually shocked that this made my top 24 because I don't think about this book often. I mean, I didn't dislike it by any means. I rated it 3.5 stars. It was entertaining, pretty fast paced. It was just an adult thriller mystery, kind of like a whodunit story that takes place on a private island. Kind of gives me the same vibes as like Knives Out. And like I said, I did really enjoy reading it. It was super entertaining, but when I look back on the year, I don't really think of that one as being a standout book. But based on what I rated books, that one does come in at spot number 24. Moving on to spot number 23, another one that surprisingly made this list is Gold by Raven Kennedy. This one also got 3.5 stars from me, and this is a part of the Plated Prisoner series. I was gonna say it's the newest release, but there actually might be one that's come out since then that I just haven't read yet. I initially started this series way back in like 2021 and have kind of just been reading it over the years as new books come out and absolutely love it. I do think this is an extremely underrated fantasy romance series, and I really wish more people would get into it. Like I said, it's fantasy romance, it's adult, it's definitely very dark, it's gruesome, there's some violence. Maybe look up trigger warnings if you're gonna go into it, but I was pleasantly surprised by how much I loved the series as a whole. I think I rated books like 2, 3, and 4 all 5 stars. It's loosely based on the legend of King Midas, but it has a fae twist. There's a lot of really interesting political intrigue, the action is great, and obviously the romance is phenomenal. However, the book Gold, the one we're talking about on this list, was kind of a bump down for me in comparison to the previous books. I didn't feel like it was as good. I mean, I still really loved it because by this point, I'm so invested in the characters and the plot and the world they're living in, so I knew I was gonna enjoy it no matter what. I just wasn't a huge fan of the direction the plot went in. Moving into spot 22, we have another book that I rated 3.5 stars, and that is 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. This is like a YA mystery, little bit of a thriller. If you don't know, Holly Jackson is the same author that wrote the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. I absolutely love those books, rated all of them 5 stars, and also ate up the Netflix show of it. So I wanted to branch out into more of her works, decided to pick up 5 Survive, and I had kind of heard like mixed opinions before going into it, and I would honestly say that my opinions on it are mixed as well. There were some things I really loved about it, and then there were some things I was not a fan of. I did not really enjoy our main character that much, and I did find the plot a little bit predictable. But something about Holly Jackson's writing is just so good at sucking you into the plot and getting you invested in what's happening. And that's why this book is getting spot number 22 on the list. Spot number 21 is going to the second book in an adult contemporary romance series, the Knock 'Em Out trilogy, Things We Hide from the Light. I was pleasantly surprised by this book. I remember thinking the first book was super entertaining, really smutty and spicy, just like a fun read, but I didn't feel that attached to the characters. However, this one really surprised me. I enjoyed both of our main characters, and although I did feel like the book was a little bit too long, like I wish it could have been cut down by a couple hundred pages, I still felt really invested in the plot and what was going on in the characters' lives. I really like how Lucy Score is able to take this like fun, spicy, smutty romance and then also throw in some like crime, action, and mystery a little bit. It's just a really fun, entertaining blend. Spot number 20 is gonna go to The Prisoner's Throne by Holly Black. This is the same author that wrote The Cruel Prince / The Folk of Air trilogy, and The Prisoner's Throne is actually book 2 in the spin-off series of The Cruel Prince trilogy. I know that doesn't make sense, but I'm pretty sure everything I just said was correct. This is a YA fantasy with a touch of romance, and it follows the younger brother of the main character from the Cruel Prince trilogy. In this spin-off, I did not care for the first book at all. Decided to continue on to this one and was kind of blown out of the water by how much I loved it. It felt a lot more reminiscent of the original trilogy, which I loved, and everything about this fantasy world is just so whimsical and magical and fun, but also keeps you on the edge of your seat at the same time. I just think Holly Black is genius, and this is just like a very true high fantasy series, and I just get so immersed in the world anytime I'm reading her writing. Spot number 19 is gonna go to one of the classics I read this year, which is The Outsiders. And I mainly picked this up because I feel like this is a common book for like middle school or high school curriculum, but in my experience, I never had to read that for school. So I kind of just thought that that one would make sense to read since it is so well loved and so many people have read it. I remember actually annotating it and highlighting different quotes in different colors and kind of just like taking notes on it. It was a short, quick, easy read, which I really loved because I feel like oftentimes classics are very complicated to read and take a lot of brain power. This one, very simple, but the message behind it was so impactful, and I can understand why this book is so famous and so loved. I still need to watch the movie of it, but I did really enjoy this book, and this one was kind of a surprise for me this year. At number 18, we have The Inmate by Frida McFadden. This is like an adult thriller. I oftentimes compare Frida McFadden to like the thriller version of Colleen Hoover. She has so many books, but they're all extremely fast-paced, so easy to fly through, so easy to get invested in, have the most insane plot twists. Like, I just know if I crack open a Frida book that I'm gonna have a good time. Is it my most favorite writing in the entire world? No. Is it my most favorite characters in the entire world? No. But do I always have an extremely good time reading them? Absolutely yes. And that was the case for The Inmate as well. I thought I had the book figured out, but I was mistaken. There was plot twist after plot twist after plot twist. And before reading this one, I had only read a couple other Frida books, and this one blew me out of the water. I absolutely loved it, and I cannot wait to read more by her. Coming in at number 17, we have our first series on the list, and that is the Bridge Kingdom series by Danielle L. Jensen. This is, I believe, a new adult fantasy romance, and so far at the time of me filming this, I've only read books 1, 2, and 3. I do believe there are some others out, but the way I chose where to put it on this list is based off the average of what I rated those 3 books. Unpopular opinion, The Inadequate Heir was actually my favorite out of those 3. I often hear people saying the first 2 books are significantly better than books 3 and 4. However, I enjoyed the plotline and the characters we were following in book 3 a lot more than I did in books 1 and 2. I just found their dynamic to be more interesting. I'm not going to talk about it too much in this video because I will be diving a little bit more into it when I do my December reading wrap up. Now we're to spot 16 and we're moving into books that all got rated 4 stars. Spot number 16 is going to go to No Exit. This is a mystery thriller book I read, I think, earlier in the year, and honestly, this is another one where I was surprised at where it was on the list because it isn't one I think about often. But when I reflect back on my time reading the book, I do remember that I had a really good time reading it and I was on the edge of my seat constantly. Like, it was one of those books that you forget that you're reading while you're reading it. That's how invested I was in it. It was also pretty short and easy to fly through, and I do think there's a film adaptation of it that I have not yet watched. This is definitely on the scarier side of the thrillers I've read, but I didn't mind it because it made it that much more intense and thrilling. Spot number 15 is gonna go to Lightlark by Alex Astor, and I feel like this is a very controversial book because for the longest time I saw people like literally bashing this book on the internet, saying the writing was bad, it was predictable, it was a carbon copy of other authors' works. And while I can kind of see where people are coming from, I really enjoyed this book. And I don't know if it's just because I had heard so many bad things about it that I had low expectations going in and then it surprised me, but I enjoyed the tropes, the setting, like everything about this. I just thought it was fun. This book is like a YA dystopian fantasy. It's definitely a mix of genres, but leans more towards the fantasy side. I will say it is a very trope heavy book. It has the trials trope, a love triangle, and then there's some other tropes that I'm not going to mention because of spoilers, but it definitely is very trope heavy. But honestly, I can't be mad at that because I had a great time reading it. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. It's not my absolute favorite fantasy romance in the entire world, but I had a really great time reading it. It was entertaining, and I think there's more books coming out in the series that I will probably continue into to see what I think. I might get flamed for spot number 14, and honestly, I'm shocked with myself a little bit for this book not being higher on the list. Funny Story by Emily Henry. If you guys know me, you know that I am a huge fan of Emily Henry. I love everything she writes. I will preach it to the world about how great Emily Henry's books are. I had read all of her books up until this one, which was her new release. And this, unfortunately, may be a situation of I was expecting it to be a 5-star read and it wasn't. So then I felt let down by it, and that is by no means the book's fault or Emily Henry's fault. That's 100% my fault. But I do think I kind of went into this book with higher expectations than what it was. That's not to say I didn't enjoy it. Obviously, it's spot number 14 out of all the books I read this year. I gave it 4 stars, but that to me is all it was. It was a solid 4 stars. It's nothing to go write home about. Like, I did really enjoy it, but it just, to me, didn't live up to the hype of how much I love some of her other books. But I did still really enjoy it. I think the biggest thing for me, honestly, in not rating it higher is that this book felt very slice of life. Also, I never mentioned, but it is like a contemporary romance, but it's written more like a general fiction. Back to what I was saying, it's very slice of life, and to me, it started to feel a little like mundane. And I don't want to use the word boring because I was not bored in this book, but it was just very simple, like the plot line of it. Like, I think I even did a reading vlog where I was reading this book and I talked about how some paragraphs would be like, she got up and she went into the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water and make a bowl of cereal. It was just like, I don't need to know what she's eating for breakfast. Like, I wanted to dive more into the emotional aspect of the romance and the family drama and those aspects of the plot. I feel like it sounds like I'm bashing this book, but I actually really loved it and really enjoyed it. Again, still a 4-star read for me, still phenomenal. Top 14 out of all the books I read this year. Just compared to Emily Henry's other books, I didn't love it quite as much. And coming in at spot 13, we have the entire Heartstopper series. This was a series that kind of came out of nowhere for me this year. I picked it up on a whim because I was in a reading slump. I wanted something that was easy to get through. This entire series are graphic novels, which is not something I typically read, and I just kind of thought, like, this will be easy. It's filled with pictures, like, I'll get through it quick. This will help me out of my reading slump. Little did I know I would end up absolutely falling head over heels in love with the story and the characters and just everything about it. Like, even talking about it right now makes me want to smile, and like, I don't know, I just love it so much. I've now watched the entire TV show as well, and these books just make me so happy and giddy, and I never would have thought that a graphic novel could make me feel so emotionally connected and invested in the characters. I'm obsessed with Nick and Charlie, and I feel like those two, and honestly all the characters, feel like real people to me. Alice Oseman did a wonderful job bringing these characters to life, and I highly recommend those books to everyone. They are graphic novels, but I would classify the genre as like YA romance, I guess. Now to move on to spot number 12, we're actually heading into our 4.25 to 4.75 star range. Spot number 12 is going to Reckless by Lauren Roberts. This is the sequel to Powerless that came out, I think, last year. And this may surprise some people because this is another one that on the internet I saw so many people saying they were let down by this book, they were expecting more, they wished it had been better, they loved the first book but the second one wasn't as good, and I wholeheartedly disagree. This is a YA/NA maybe fantasy romance. I read the first book back when it first came out and then read this one as soon as it came out, and I ate up every second of it. I've seen a lot of complaints that it's overly trope heavy, but that's kind of what I love about it. Lauren Roberts A, knows how to write a man that fantasy romance readers are gonna love, and B, she herself is a reader, so she knows what tropes we want to read in books. So like, I can't be mad at that all my favorite tropes were thrown into one book. I guess I just have more of the optimistic viewpoint on it, whereas some people think it was a little bit too much. To each their own. I loved it. I thought it was great. I was hooked from the second I started reading it. And the second I closed it, I wished the third book was here already for me to pick up and start reading. Spot number 11 is actually going to a book I recently finished, and that is The Friend Zone by Abby Jimenez. I rated it 4.25 stars. I'm a huge fan of Abby Jimenez. I love everything she writes. And I want to say this might have been one of her first releases, and I think I read something somewhere that the story of this book was like loosely based on her and her husband, which I think is so sweet. It's an adult contemporary romance, and Abby Jimenez is the queen at balancing rom-com with emotional romance. Like, I will be sobbing on one page and then laughing the next page. The characters are so endearing. It's funny enough that it feels like a rom-com, but it's emotional enough, and the characters are so relatable that it feels realistic and like these could be real people out in the world dealing with real struggles that people face. And that's what I love about her writing so much. Not to mention, all her books are just quick, fast-paced, easy reads, and this one was no exception. I had an absolute blast reading it, and then I also cried reading it. And funny enough, coming in at number 9, we have another Abby Jimenez book, which is Part of Your World. Part of Your World is in like a set of interconnected standalone books. The Friend Zone, which I just talked about, is in a separate set of interconnected standalones. Basically everything I just said about the last Abby Jimenez book applies to this one as well. This one kind of had a fun element of like a big city girl, small town guy, and I thought that was really fun. It felt very much like I was in a rom-com movie. I think I would literally read her grocery list. That's how much I love Abby Jimenez. Spot number 9 is also a very recent read of mine, and that is The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I rated this 4.5 stars. I finished this actually on a plane ride back from California. Literally, like, people say like, oh, I finished that book in one sitting. No, this was like a 2-hour plane ride, and I read the entire book. That's how good it was, and that's how much it hooked me. If you don't know, Jennifer Lynn Barnes also wrote the Inheritance Games trilogy, which I read. It's maybe been almost 2 years since I read that series, but I absolutely loved it. But then people have been telling me that The Naturals was better, so I finally dove into it and picked it up. And the best way I can describe this series is that it's YA mystery thriller that's very reminiscent of Criminal Minds. It's like if teenage prodigies got thrown into criminal minds to train and be a part of the FBI. Like, actually, that is the premise of the book. I ate it up and cannot wait to finish the rest of the series. I just have a feeling I'm gonna fly through those books and love all of them. Spot number 8 is gonna go to The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. This is a contemporary romance, general fiction type of book. And then it also has a little bit of magical realism elements, and this was another one that really surprised me this year by how much I loved it. I just kept noticing all these like beautiful quotes, and like the way the most simple things were written sounded beautiful. Like, she could be describing someone washing their hair in the shower and would somehow make it sound like poetry. I'm not gonna dive too much into what the premise of the plot is, because I feel like this is one of those that it's just better to go in a little bit blind, but just trust me when I say you will be so emotionally invested. You'll love the characters. The plot is fantastic. The messages and themes behind it, and the writing. The writing was my favorite thing about it. I mean, she did a fantastic job, and surprisingly, I have not picked up any other Ashley Poston books since finishing this, but it is a goal of mine going into 2025 to read some of her other books, because if I love them even close to as much as I loved The 7-Year Slip, then it'll be worth it. For spot number 7, we have another series or trilogy, and that is the War of Lost Hearts trilogy by Carissa Broadbent. This is a new adult or adult fantasy romance trilogy. I will say heavier on the fantasy side than on the romance, but the romance is still a pretty prevalent part of the story. I think there's actually a video where I go a lot more in depth about my thoughts on this series, but basically the way Carissa Broadbent's mind works blows me away. The way she's able to build this elaborate political system and magic system, and the world building is so expansive, but not to the point where it's confusing. You just feel fully immersed, and then she continues to build and build and build on that. It's spectacular, and it blows my mind how she's able to achieve that, all while having very endearing and enjoyable characters that also have flaws, but you still want to root for them. That's all I'm gonna say about it. It's fantasy romance. If you like that type of thing, I could not recommend this series more. In spot number 6, we have a series I honestly did not know if I was going to enjoy, and that is the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. This is a sci-fi series that I feel like is growing traction constantly on the internet, and I had seen so much hype about it that honestly I was kind of putting it off because I'd never really read sci-fi before and I was hesitant about it. I finally got myself to pick it up and was blown away by how much I loved it. These books are definitely out of my comfort zone, but I highly enjoyed them. They're definitely dark. The politics and world building are probably some of the most confusing politics and world building I've ever read, and if you asked me to explain the political system to you, I probably wouldn't do a very good job, but that's not to say that I didn't love these books. And I think the big thing that did it for me was the characters. The characters and character relationships with each other in these stories are so dynamic and interesting and just like moving in a way. I know that sounds cheesy, but you just have to read the books to understand. But if you've ever seen it be talked about and it intrigues you, I would say just give it a try. It's definitely not gonna be for everyone, but I'm so glad I picked it up when I did, and I can't imagine having put it off any longer. I actually only made it through the first 5 books, I think that's right. I ended up DNFing one of them, like a soft DNF, because at the time of me reading it, the story had gotten really dark and I just wasn't like really in the headspace for that. I will say the first 3 books are like by far my favorites. After that is when it starts to get a lot heavier, more violent, more dark, which wasn't my fave. That's not to say I won't go back and finish it at some point. I would like to continue the story, but the first 3 were definitely like perfection in my opinion. Everything about it I loved. I ate it up. And even though it was really complicated, I wouldn't have had it any other way, because I feel like that just made the book. And I'm gonna stop rambling about Red Rising. If it sounds interesting to you, I'm urging you to pick it up and just give it a try. Coming in at 5th place, we have the Magnolia Parks universe. This one was also a big surprise to me, because when I read the first book, I did not absolutely love it. I thought it was entertaining. I enjoyed the writing, but I thought the characters were insufferable, and I was not super obsessed with the plot. But I pushed on and ended up absolutely eating the series up crying over the characters, thinking about the characters nonstop, and I'm so glad I pushed myself to keep reading. If you don't know about this series, it's called the Magnolia Parks universe, but you have your Magnolia Parks books and then you have your Daisy Hates books. So it basically goes like Magnolia, Daisy, Magnolia, Daisy, Magnolia. That's where we're at. So it'll be like Magnolia's story and perspective, then Daisy's story and perspective, and so on, and they switch. However, like in Magnolia book 1, things that are happening in Daisy book 1, it's like this. Like there's overlap, but you don't know everything that's happening. So like even if you read the first book and go to the second book, you don't feel like you're rereading the same story because it's from a different character's perspective, and there's things you didn't know were happening the whole time you read the first book, and then it continues. It's basically like this. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm not making any sense, but basically, if this makes sense to you, that's how the books are written, and I loved it. It's about high society London. Imagine Gossip Girl if they were British and way more toxic and way more rich and a little bit older. That's basically Magnolia Parks. And my top book out of that series is the most recent release, Magnolia Parks Into the Dark. I'm just gonna say I bawled my eyes out. Probably look up trigger warnings if you're gonna get into these books, but every single book proceeded to rip my heart out and put it back in my chest, and then it kept doing that as I kept reading. Can't wait for the next Daisy book to come out. I love them. And coming in our next spot, we have the Crowns of Nyaxia series, which is by Carissa Broadbent, who I talked about just a little bit ago for the, what's that series called? The War of Lost Hearts trilogy. I actually read the Crowns of Nyaxia first. At the time of me filming this, the most recent book has come out, but I have not read it yet. So I'm just basing this off of the first 2 main books. I did also read the novella, but I did not count that into my average rating just because it's like different characters on a different continent and like it's really unrelated. So we're just focusing on the first 2 books because that's what I read this year, and I loved every second of them. Vampires, trials, enemies to lovers, who did this to you, badass female main character, forbidden love, give it all to me. That's what this book was. It was great. That's all I can say. I loved it. I loved both the books. I think I liked the first book a little bit more. If you're a fan of like ACOTAR and Fourth Wing, I feel like this would be a good direction to go into next because it gives kind of similar vibes, but it's different enough that it doesn't feel like a repeat plot, if that makes sense. Now we're moving into our top 3 of the entire year. All 3 of these were 5 stars, no questions asked. Like the second I closed the book, 5 stars. Number 3 is surprising probably to both me and anyone watching, and that's because this book is a classic, and at the very beginning of the year I had decided I wanted to challenge myself to read more classics. This is the first one I decided to pick up, and that is Little Women. Like I said, I did rate this book 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I just feel like the story is so endearing, and I had already seen the movie, the most recent version of the movie, before reading the book, so I kind of knew the general premise of the story and what was going to happen, but something about like reading the way it's written just made me feel like cozy, if that makes sense. I could go on and on about why I love this book. I'm not going to, but if you're interested in starting your journey into classics, I feel like this would be a really good one to start with. Like I said, the characters and the relationship dynamics are so endearing, and you just can't help but fall in love with the story and the people in the story. Coming in at second place, also a 5-star read, we have Abby Jimenez's newest release, Just for the Summer. Before reading this book, I thought nothing would be Yours Truly. I was convinced she could not write a better book than that, and Just for the Summer proved me completely wrong. I was sobbing my eyes out, I was laughing. Everything I talked about earlier with Abby Jimenez and her writing applies to this book as well, except she did it 10 times better. I loved every single thing about this book. There's not one thing I would change. I love how she's able to take like these 2 characters that could just be normal everyday people and then flesh them out and explain and go in depth onto their personal issues and struggles in life, while also showing you how they're building a connection and learning about each other and growing together. And everything about what she does in her stories is phenomenal, and I do think Just for the Summer was her absolute best one yet. And all I will say is if you like the acts of service trope or your love language is acts of service, you need to read this book. I absolutely adored both of our two main characters, and the female main character was actually named Emma, which was just kind of like a special touch for me because it's interesting to read a main character who has the same first name as me, but she could have had any name in the world and I would have loved this book equally as much. And then coming in at our number one spot, the highest rated series and individually books I read this year was no question to me. Even before I sat down to make this list, I knew in my heart that this was my number one, and that is the Boys of Tommen series by Chloe Walsh. In the year of 2024, I read every single book that is out as of now in that series. This is a contemporary romance. I've seen it be classified as YA, and while the characters are of YA age range, the topics and subject matters of the book are not very YA, so in my opinion, I would not consider any book in this series to be YA. In my opinion, it's more new adult or adult. I don't really know how to classify it there, but it is primarily like a contemporary romance. This is actually set in Ireland, which right off the bat intrigued me a lot. I quickly fell in love with the characters and this world they lived in. It's interesting because the way these stories are written is almost slice of life feeling, like nothing too crazy aside from the major plot points is happening. I don't want to like throw people off when I say nothing too crazy happens because a lot of crazy things happen, but outside of those big major plot points, most of what you're reading is just their day-to-day life, going to school, learning about their friendships, learning about their relationships and family dynamics. But something about the way it's written, you just feel like you know these characters to their core. There's Binding 13, Keeping 13, Saving 6, Redeeming 6, and then the newest release is Taming 7. There are supposed to be more books to come out in the future, which I absolutely cannot wait for those to come out. But my two probably favorites out of all of those are the first two books, Binding and Keeping 13. It's really hard to describe what these books are about because in a way, they're sports romances, but I wouldn't say that's the premise. That's more of like the setting, and I would just say everyone should read these. If it interests you at all, just go into it. Maybe look up trigger warnings. I do think they might be listed in the fronts of the books, but I don't think I could do these books justice if I tried to explain what they're about. But I am so glad I read them this year. They were easily my favorite books on their own or as a series as a whole, and I already want to reread all of them. I just feel so much for the characters that are in these books. They're deep and heavy books. They hit you really hard emotionally, but the characters are so endearing and funny at times and relatable. And like I said, they just feel like real people. And I think it's really powerful when a book is able to make you feel like that and feel like the characters could exist in the world we live in. If you want to know more of my thoughts on these books, I will link some previous videos up here somewhere to where I talk a little bit more in depth about what the series is about and my thoughts on them. This is a pretty popular series, but I don't feel like it gets the hype it deserves, and so I just want everyone in the world to love them as much as I love them, and these books were easily the standouts from the year of 2024, and I am so glad that these stories came into my life and that I read them and got through all the books, and I need Chloe Walsh to come out with the next book ASAP. And those are my top 24 books of the year, but before I end the video, I am gonna quickly like rapid fire answer some other questions from like the yearly book tag. I just picked out a couple that I felt were relevant for what I've read and what I wanted to talk about. So first we have the most disappointing book you read of the year, and I do not like to give bad reviews. I don't like to talk negatively about books, but I do have one that really stands out in my mind, and that is The Brothers Hawthorne by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I actually talked about this author in some of her series earlier in the video. She wrote the Inheritance Games trilogy, which I absolutely love, and she wrote The Naturals, which I recently started reading and am loving so far. However, The Brothers Hawthorne is a spin-off of the Inheritance Games that follows the same characters, and A, this book was way too long for what it was. B, the plot was not that interesting. C, I just got bored while reading it. And honestly, I think if she wanted to continue the world that these characters were in, I would have loved to see that, just maybe in like a novella style. Reading it as a full-length novel that was actually longer than any of the books in the main trilogy really just let me down, and I found myself feeling like I had to force myself through the book in order to finish it, which was super disappointing because I do love those first 3 books, the original trilogy. I love the characters, the storyline is super entertaining, and then I feel like we just went from like here to here with that spin-off book, and I do think she's released another spin-off since then and maybe more in the future. Unfortunately, I probably will not be continuing with those. Next question is a book you read that was overhyped, and I can easily say that is the Mind F series by St. Abbey. I have been hearing about this book for years. All over YouTube and TikTok, people rave about how good it is. It's like a thriller, dark romance about an FBI agent and a serial killer who are dating. I was expecting this really intense and thrilling, dramatic romance with lots of plot twists and action, and I felt like I was reading bad Wattpad. The romance itself did not hit for me. It felt very insta-lovey, and it didn't even quite feel like dark romance. Like if you took out the fact that it was an FBI agent and serial killer, it just felt like your run-of-the-mill boring romance story. And then the thriller mystery aspect of it itself was just not interesting to me. I wasn't hooked. I was never really on the edge of my seat. I wasn't excited to find out what was gonna happen next. I ended up DNFing this book. It's actually 5 books in one. I think I got partway through the 4th book and decided just to put it down. I know this is a really unpopular opinion because a lot of people love the Mind F series. It just wasn't for me for whatever reason. I just was not entertained and I was not having a good time reading it, so I decided to put it down. Question number 3 is your favorite book couple from the year, and similar to last year, I cannot just name one book couple because I have so many that I love, so I'm going to just rapid fire name what my favorite couples were. If you don't want spoilers, because there may be loosely potential spoilers, just skip a little bit ahead in the video. My favorite couples from books of the year were Emma and Justin from Just for the Summer, Magnolia and BJ from the Magnolia Parks universe, all the characters from the Boys of Tommen series, Johnny and Shannon, Aoife and Joey, Claire and Gibbsy, Max and Tasana from Daughter of No Worlds, as well as Araya and Rain from The Serpent and the Wings of Night, both series by Carissa Broadbent, Nick and Charlie from Heartstopper, they honestly might be my favorite. Lastly, Zara and Karis from the Bridge Kingdom series. On a similar note, we have favorite main character. I'm gonna do the same thing and just rapid fire a few of my favorites. Kristen from The Friend Zone, Tasana from Daughter of No Worlds, Hayden from Powerless, and Aoife from the Boys of Tommen series, specifically Saving and Redeeming 6. Another question was the happiest book you read all year, and I remember last year I was struggling because even my like quote unquote happy books were just like romance books that made me cry. This year I actually do have a happiest book, and that is any book in the Heartstopper series. I went in depth on it earlier about how like giddy and giggly and happy this series made me, but genuinely I've never read happier books. Like I just felt so warm and fuzzy reading those, and I was constantly smiling. And then on the flip side, the saddest book I read all year would be any book in the Boys of Tommen series. As you know, that was my #1 series and books of the year. I absolutely love them, but there's no doubt that those are super sad books. They all made me sob, but that's like half the reason why I love them so much. If you like an emotional read, go for the Boys of Tommen. The next question is the most frustrating book you read all year, and I have to go with both Hunting and Haunting Adeline. I don't even know which one comes first. I think it might be Haunting and then Hunting. I actually read these for a challenge video where I read books I was intimidated by, and I definitely could have done without reading either of those. The first one, I kind of just felt indifferent about. Like, it was entertaining. I did not really feel disturbed by it. I just didn't really get what all the hype was about. However, the second book made me feel dark inside, and I felt myself having to like push through because I just felt like icky and depressed while reading it. So that was really frustrating because I kept finding myself having to put down the book, and like I guess I was just confused about like why we made those certain choices for the characters and the plot, and just like I would not recommend those books as a whole. I know some people really love those. They were definitely not for me. I probably will never choose to pick up something like that again. And it's not even that I'm against dark romance, but it's just the things that are playing out in those books I do not enjoy reading about, and it made me feel extremely frustrated and icky. And then the very last question is favorite book cover, and I'm torn between 3. So I'm either gonna have to say my new special editions of the Knock 'Em Out trilogy by Lucy Score. I recently posted a TikTok and Instagram reel of me unboxing them, and they're hardcovers, they have foiling and sprayed edges, and they're absolutely stunning, like might be the most beautiful books on my shelves. But I also really love the cover of Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. This is a general fiction book I read recently. The artwork on this cover is just absolutely stunning. And then my third one would be Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, and maybe I'm just biased because I love this book so much, but I'm obsessed with cover art. I think it's so pretty. I love all the colors, the little cartoon people on it, like everything about it is perfect. And those are all of the questions I wanted to add in and answer for the video, which brings us to the end of the video. I have a feeling this is going to be a really long video, but I wanted to cover all my bases, share all my thoughts, and especially give you guys what my top 24 books of the year were. Comment below if you've read any of the books that were in my top 24 and what you thought of them, and also comment what your #1 book of the year was. Be on the lookout for my next reading wrap up. I think I'm gonna combine November and December, so we'll have lots of books to wrap up and talk about. And you can always also head over to my page and check out all the videos I currently have posted now. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you wanna see more of my videos in the future. And I do have my Instagram, TikTok, and Goodreads linked in the description below if you'd be interested in following me over there and checking out my other content. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. 2024 has been an incredible reading year and an incredible year on this platform and my other social platforms. And I can't wait to see what 2025 has in store for us. Bye guys.